before my father died, I wasn't very keen on sort of the Igbo traditional way of mourning, which is often quite a celebration. And I just thought, why should I celebrate? Someone died. But then my father died, and we had, my father was Catholic, but we had a Catholic funeral, a Catholic mass, but we also had the full Igbo traditional rites where, different groups come. There's a process, you dance a lot. I was holding my father's photograph and dancing, surrounded by people. And I found it so beautiful. I found it comforting. Again, that idea that I was part of a larger group. So these women, women singing in Igbo, and I'm dancing, and there's drumming. And I really found it very comforting, and it surprised me. I'm a king. I made peace with my father. I was such a daddy's girl. My father was the loveliest man in the world. Really, he was. And when he died suddenly during COVID. And I just felt that I have always been James and Grace Adichie's daughter. And now James Adichie was gone. And it kind of made me think, what am I now? And my father was always kind of my sounding board. He read everything I wrote. He had very clear opinions about things. And suddenly that was gone. But a part of me thought, well, mom is still here. And then part of mourning, I think, is this panic about who else am I going to lose? And this sense of I want to hold on to what I have left. I want to hold on desperately. And then a few months later, my mother died. And I just, I was stunned. And I don't think I've made peace with that. And so when I talk about coldness, there's a lot of anger that I feel about my mother dying when she did and how she did very suddenly. But there's also a kind of awareness of your own mortality. I've always kind of been aware of my mortality. I've always sort of been I have very dark thoughts, Kelly. So now I look at my daughter, for example, and I'm thinking, I really need to be alive for her. Like, I need to be alive for long enough to make sure she's okay when I die. But also, I think it makes you, It's hard. And it really doesn't go away. People have said to me it gets better with time. It's less immediate, I think, with time. But when it comes, it's heavy. It's difficult to talk about, of course, because it terrifies us that we're going to lose people we love. But I think it's a useful thing to do, to talk about it. My daughter was 4 when my father died, 5. And then, of course, her grandmother dies afterwards. And she recently lost an uncle, my husband's brother. And she's sort of almost sanguine about death. She's like, when are we going for uncle's funeral? And a part of me is thinking, is this normal? Is she healthy mentally? Yeah. But I think it's simply that very early on, she became aware that death is part of the cycle of life. Mm-hmm. And I think this country in the US, that particularly shies away from talking about death. And it's even reflected, I think, in the medical system. My husband is a physician here, and he talks about how often there's this sort of desire to deny death and to sometimes put patients through really difficult, rigorous trials, when really maybe the time is to let them go in peace and sort of good hospice care. And maybe part of it is because we don't make the conversations about mortality ordinary. Normal, ordinary. What I did find very comforting was just the funeral. I mean, before my father died, I wasn't very keen on sort of the Igbo traditional way of mourning, which is often quite a celebration. And I just thought, why should I celebrate? Someone died. But then my father died, and we had, my father was Catholic, but we had a Catholic funeral, a Catholic mass, but we also had the full Igbo traditional rites where, different groups come. There's a process, you dance a lot. I was holding my father's photograph and dancing, surrounded by people. And I found it so beautiful. I found it comforting. Again, that idea that I was part of a larger group. So these women, women singing in Igbo, and I'm dancing, and there's drumming. And I really found it very comforting. And it surprised me, because I think one of the things that grief does is it surprises you. You really don't know how you will grieve until you grieve. I've dealt with my father, I think, My mother, I haven't. It's been such a different process. And, and yeah, I mean, often we say we grieve differently. We really do grieve differently. And so the funeral I found comforting. Maybe the other thing is that I've become less sure of certain things. Yes. I've become more porous, flexible, a bit less smug, because, grief teaches you that there's a lot you don't know. My father was such a force. So was my mother. My mother actually was a bigger force. My mother was just, she was intelligent. She was very bold. She spoke her mind. She was beautiful. She occupied space. And suddenly she's gone. And I'm thinking, well, where is that force? And it doesn't matter what one believes about the afterlife, but it's the idea that something is gone. And I often spend a lot of time thinking about it, but it's the unknowability of it that makes you realize how small you are. Nobody will ever love me like my parents did. And really, it's their love that I think sort of propelled me. And people will often say to me, well, you don't seem to care about sort of pleasing people. I like pleasing people I like. But the reason is I think I was loved. My parents, their love was steady, unquestioning. It was always there. And it's such a gift, I think. And when I was growing up, I thought it was normal. Right? I thought everybody had that. And now I realize everybody doesn't. And so when you have that good fortune, it's a precious gift. I'm really interested in thinking about language and how we use language. And I think clarity is important. And so when we talk about being cancelled, even that is so loaded. And I think a lot of this has to do with how extremely polarized this country has become. The tribalism in America is incredible. I'm African. I've never seen this kind of tribalism before. The level of tribalism, I think, means that it's difficult for us now to talk truthfully about things. So I want to talk about cancel culture, but before I do, I want to say that just because that expression has been co-opted by a certain kind of sort of right-wing cohort of people, it doesn't mean that it's not happening. We live in a climate of fear, and we also live in a climate of reluctance to acknowledge that fear. Because there are consequences, and which is why I'm very carefully answering your question. Because I'm so conscious of it, and I'm so determined to continue to think fiercely for myself, I have always thought fiercely. And one of the things that happens, I think, in this country is that in some ways there's a kind of, you're not supposed to think. You're supposed to follow your tribe. I resist that really fiercely. I wish we didn't have to think about it. I wish we lived in a world where we could just express ourselves. And for me as a writer, it's most important to me because I think that literature is so essential. Right? And I know that there are talented writers today in this country who are holding back, whose stories would be different if they were not writing in this climate of fear. And there's something very sad about it. We're talking about writers who are telling stories and want to tell them truthfully, especially in literature. Literature is the last frontier for journalism, I think, is gone. Sorry. I think there's so much. I think the polarization in this country has really shaped journalism. And so it feels to me that literature and storytelling is the last frontier. This is how we can know who we are. This is how we can know how things feel. This is how we can understand human motivation. And if we have sensitivity readers who are saying, well, take that out because so-and-so is going to be offended, how? We're going to tell lies. And there's a part of me, and this is maybe the melodramatic part of me, that I think it's terrible that we are going to leave behind for generations to come stories that are untrue. Mm-hmm. People reading contemporary writing today, I'm not sure that they would get a real true sense of what contemporary life is like. And there's a loss there. Like, it's a huge loss to us as a civilization. I was talking to a woman who's a comedian, and she talked about how it was difficult to talk about the things that she cared about, honestly, because she was always thinking about who's going to be, can I not? And what it does is it makes you feel guilty of what you haven't committed. I came to the US to go to college in 1997. And I think America has changed a lot in that time. And I don't mean changed in a good way. I think the level of public discourse has become so pedestrian and simple and uninteresting, boring, predictable. And there's something about it, there's a vitality that isn't there. The sad thing about it is that I know that it's sort of underneath all the layers of bullshit. There's a kind of cowardice. And I think I saw it in that debate where journalists couldn't actually say, this is not true. Social media, it seems to me that it's set up to encourage this kind of extreme, unnuanced, often untrue positions that people take. I think that there are two just really extreme extremes in this country, and I don't think they will ever reconcile. But I do think that there is a vast, underappreciated middle of people who I really think want to have conversations and want to understand and acknowledge that we share a common humanity, all of those things. I really believe that. And maybe it's that middle that we need to think more about. Because often it's the extreme, it's the loudest voices that end up shaping public discourse, and it shouldn't be. Because often those loudest voices are on the extreme end, and I'm a lot more interested in that middle. Which is why I think there's also sort of this need for more people to speak up, right? And I talked about being fragile humans, and we are. But there is also something about that, the wonderful strength that comes from knowing you're not alone.
I know.
Right? And I know that there are women who, because they have spoken in the past, they make it able for me to speak. People need to have more courage. We need more moral courage.
Yeah.
And so I can't tell you how many people have said to me privately, I feel, I really agree with you, because I spoke about free speech at the Wreath lecture in London, and there were people who were very upset because they felt that since I'm on the political left, I should not be talking about free speech, which is strange. But again, it's because in this country, even that idea has been co-opted by the right, right? And so for some people who are strong tribes people, you shouldn't even talk about free speech. But I'm a writer, I'm a storyteller, and free speech is essential. But there are also people who came to me privately, people from my tribe, who would say, I really agree with you, but I can't say it publicly. So I want those people to say it publicly. Speak up for nuance, speak up for plurality, speak up for, anybody who reads fiction knows that there are multiple points of view in the world. There are multiple points of view. We need to speak out about those things. I'm a king, yes, I'm a king, I think I'm a king.